Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you today. Thanks for taking this short time to talk to me. I want to talk to you today about active shooter events. As a lot of you guys have not probably figured out yet, I am in law enforcement. One of the things I'm really passionate about and that I do a lot of training with is active shooter events. I teach a lot of law enforcement as well as civilians. So, the quick thing I want to talk to you guys about today is this is actually a 2 hour class that I put on, but I'm going to try and do it here in about 7 minutes. So, we're going to hit the high points of this, really, basically, is what I'm saying. So let's talk about CRAZE training. Now, to understand a little bit about CRAZE training, that's basically an acronym for Civilian Response to Active Shooter Events. So let me tell you a little bit about where CRAZE training came about. Basically, this came about 20 years ago. Everybody thinks of an active shooter event or a school shooting, and what comes to everybody's mind? It's Columbine, of course. Unfortunately, that tragic event was so detrimental to so many people. But if any good has come out of it, is the fact that it's pushed us as law enforcement to develop new and better ways to respond to these events. Now, coming out of that, we can't just rely on law enforcement, of course. So that's when CRAZE training comes in. CRAZE is taught by, or was created, I'm sorry, by the same people that created the ALERT program, which is what teaches law enforcement on how to better respond to these events. So the CRAZE training is a spinoff of that, which is basically designed for the general public. That's why, hence, civilian response to active shooter events. So let's talk about that for a minute. And again, like I said, this is actually a 2 hour ordeal that I teach. So we're going to try and do this in, quite a bit of less time, obviously. So let's just hit the high points. So basically, what is an active shooter? You need to understand what that is to even understand where we're going with this. So an active shooter is one or more people engaged in killing or the attempted killing of people. Again, that sounds like a really scary deal. So let's talk about basically what are the three stages of an active shooter event. Well, you have denial, deliberation, and decisive moment. Now, denial is what we have to push through first, which enables us to stand a better chance of surviving this terrible event. Denial is this can't be happening to me. Denial is when you're hearing those gunshots and you want to play them off as fireworks. Well, when's the last time you heard fireworks in the middle of an office building at 2 in the afternoon? It's not. It's gunshots, and you need to recognize them as such. The sooner that you can recognize that, you can move on to the next moment. You can move on to the next phase of this, which is deliberation. And in deliberation is basically what you should do and what's the best way to go about this. And that's where it comes in really big with schools is practicing. Practice, practice, practice. That's when you have to do these lockdown drills. I teach this at the high school that I work at, and I think I've gotten really good at it, and I've gotten very effective with it. However, you don't have to be at a high school or a middle school or a school in general to practice these. You can do this in your business. You could work at Walmart and you can still practice these drills. When those shots ring out, what is your plan of action? That way, God forbid this event ever does happen, you know exactly what you're going to do, where you're going to go, and how you're going to do it. And it's going to allow you to respond that much faster. Does that make sense? And then the last thing you have to worry about is that decisive moment. And that's when the best example I like to use for that is on Flight 93 on September 11th, when those courageous people on that flight decided they're going to take that airplane back. And that famous quote that will be remembered forever is when that gentleman said, "Let's roll." That was the decisive moment. They had a plan. They knew what they were going to do, and they acted on it. Again, they went through the denial. This can't be happening. The deliberation, they discussed their plan, and their decisive moment when they said, "Let's roll," and they took that plane back. Let's talk a little bit about the shooter, basically. So the shooter, there's really no profile for the shooter, unfortunately. As much as the FBI has tried and smarter people than me have tried, they really can't come up with any set thing for the shooter. We do know that they're mostly men. There's a couple exceptions to that. The YouTube shooter in Hollywood, California, about 2 years ago was a woman. And you also had the San Bernardino shooter, which was with her husband. And we know she was a woman also. So other than that, that's really the only ones that come to mind that really fit in this category of active shooter. And as far as school shootings are concerned, to this date, knock on wood, there's none that I'm aware of, and there's none that the ALERT program has been tracking, certainly since Columbine came about. So just a little bit of data. Now, the FBI runs a few years behind on this data, so really the most current thing we have to date really is as of 2014, because they're still coming up with different numbers and more accurate numbers since then. But as of 2014, we've had 179 active shooter events in the United States. And here's kind of to break that down even further, about 55% of them occur in commerce locations. So what's commerce locations? That's your malls, that's your supermarkets, that's your grocery stores, that's your Walmart. So I mean, that's a pretty much 50-50 deal, but people need to, when they think of active shooter, they think of only in schools or colleges like Virginia Tech or Columbine or Sandy Hook. But you need to realize that 55% of the time, just over half the time, they're actually occurring in your businesses, your Walmarts, your grocery stores, your malls, your Kmarts. That's what you, as a general public, really need to realize is just because you're not in a school doesn't mean these events can't happen. Let's go over I like to call it's called avoid, deny, defend. If you are put in the position of an active shooter event, God forbid, and you're in that school and those shots ring out, as a law enforcement officer, we try to tell people that you have 3 minutes. 3 minutes is the average law enforcement response time to get to that event. And that seems like a lot, that it's not a lot of time, but in the event of something stressful like that, 3 minutes is an eternity. So there's 3 things that we like to teach you guys before we close this out, and we'd like you to walk away from this from. If you're ever in that event, God forbid, you need to do 3 things, and we call it the ADD: avoid, deny, and defend. Okay, avoid is obvious. The shooter or the attacker is there, you need to avoid the area. If you can get out, you can go out a window, you need to go out a window. If you can go out the back door, you need to go out the back door. But you need to avoid that situation. You need to avoid that confrontation. If that's not an option, you need to deny the attacker access to where you're at. How do you do that? Like I teach my teachers at the school I work at, you need to be able to barricade that room. You need to be able to lock those doors. You need to be able to put desks in front of your door. You need to be able to tie ropes off to the door. You need to do whatever you have to do to deny the attacker access to that room. And last but not least, God forbid they do gain access to your location, defend. And the analogy I like to use when I teach people this is you need to act like you are the third monkey on the ramp of Noah's Ark and it's about to rain. You need to fight because that's what's going to keep you safe and that's going to get you home to your family that you love. So again, avoid, deny, defend. And to kind of conclude this, I like to talk about what to do when police arrive. You have to understand when the police do arrive in a traumatic situation like this, they're just as nervous as you are. They're just as scared as you are, but they don't know what they're coming into. So you need to obey all commands and cooperate with them fully because they don't exactly know who's who yet, and they're trying to process that scene. And in conclusion, I like to conclude this class by talking to people about the Stop the Bleed program. And that's for a whole nother 4-hour class that hopefully we can touch on later. But you need to seek medical training to help speed up that process and potentially help save a life. Because we've proven time and time again in past shootings that had tourniquets been available and had there been people that were trained to deal with traumatic bleeding, that we could have saved lives. So again, that's kind of a 2-hour class in about 8 minutes. So I hope you're able to take a little bit away from this and maybe learn a little bit something from this. Again, this is called CRASE training, CRASE. If you get a chance, reach out to your local law enforcement, and I'm sure they have somebody that can come and can bring this to your company, your business, or your school and teach it more in depth. Anyways, thank you. God bless and have a good night.